I stand to move the motion in the name of the Fianna Fáil deputies before the House this evening. And just to say at the outset, Minister, we have been raising this particular issue with regard to discretionary medical cards for some time. As far back as last year when the budget was announced, and there was an indication that there was a policy of withdrawing and removal of medical cards announced in that budget, we highlighted that this would create huge difficulties for many people out there. Now, Minister, every time I've raised this particular issue, you have consistently stated that there's been no change in policy, that there's been no change in guidelines. But any cursory glance at the number of discretionary medical cards that are presently in the system will show that there is a concerted effort by the HSE to withdraw discretionary medical cards. Now, as I said, I accept there's been no change in the guidelines. People are normally awarded a medical card based on their financial means. That is how it works with regard to medical cards. So you make an application based on your financial means, there's an assessment, there's a criteria, and you either get it or you don't on the financial merits. But there's also a mechanism whereby discretionary medical cards are granted to people who are over the income limits for an actual medical card, but because of their illness and the cost incurred with regard to that illness, a discretionary medical card is granted. And at one stage, there was over 80,000 discretionary medical cards out there. Now, Minister, I don't know about the health profile of this nation, but I know one thing for sure. There is no way that we have a situation where we have less sick people in this state today than we had a number of years ago. It is not feasible to suggest that all of a sudden, everybody seems to be getting better very quickly and that they don't have serious illnesses and don't have serious needs. So the idea that you consistently come in here when we put down Dáil questions and say, well, there is a system in place for awarding of discretionary medical cards is simply not the case. There is now a concerted policy by the HSE, and it is a policy that is primarily revolving around the need to rein in the budget. Because we all know one thing for certain, the discretionary medical card is a medical card that is being used by sick people. That's the reason it was granted to them in the first place. So by extension, the fact that it is being used, it is obviously going to be a more expensive medical card with regards to the state and the cost to the state. But the primary reason it was granted in the first place is because these people are very, very sick. Now, Minister, I have raised, as I said, in Dáil debates, I've tabled parliamentary questions time and again. And I have here a list of individuals who you could not believe would have had their discretionary medical card revoked. And in some cases, we've gone through a review process and an appeal process, and yet they have not been granted their discretionary medical card. And almost all of these people are people who have an illness that will not be cured. For example, a young boy, 6 years of age, profound intellectual and physical disabilities, confined to a wheelchair, no use of limbs, incontinent, and no form of communication, Minister. As part of a review, card withdrawn. And eventually, after a very protracted row with the HSE, a discretionary card was awarded for 6 months. For 6 months for a child with profound intellectual and physical disabilities and confined to a wheelchair and no use of his limbs. Now, Minister, I can't for the life of me understand how you can stand over a system that would, first of all, revoke the medical card, and in the context of a review, grant it eventually, but only for 6 months, to a child whose physical needs will never improve, whose intellectual needs will never improve. And yet we have this continual merry-go-round of East stating that there's been no change in policy. There has to have been a change in policy, Minister, because it is quite evident from all the figures with regard to the Dáil questions that we have tabled time and again that the number of discretionary medical cards has been reduced dramatically. Another boy, 3 years in December, Down syndrome, profoundly deaf, substantial daily care and medical needs, and intellectual disability. Medical card revoked. Minister, are you seriously telling me that you can stand over that change in policy? There is no point in you even suggesting that there hasn't been a change. But what you are doing is underhand and a sleight of hand, because you're now in a situation where you're assessing medical cards that were awarded on discretionary grounds, you're now assessing them on the guidelines that award medical cards based on financial need. And of course they will be revoked, because they weren't granted on financial grounds. They were granted on medical need. And that's why we have a situation where we have over 20,000 less discretionary medical cards in the system than we'd heretofore. Another man, lung cancer. He previously had a card for 3 years, recently diagnosed bipolar. March, half the right lung removed, and the medical card withdrawn. The reason I highlight this, Minister, is because I do believe that you probably do not want to stand over this. You actually know in your heart and your soul that these particular cases are, it's appalling that we have a system that can actually allow this to happen. And the reason I raise these individual cases is because what you're being told and what's happening on the ground are poles apart, Minister. There isn't a deputy inside in this House that would concur with your view that there hasn't been a change in policy. There isn't a deputy in the House. Every day of the week you look at parliamentary questions, you look at people in debates in this chamber, in the context of health, who are consistently highlighting the fact that discretionary medical cards are being taken away from the sickest people. From the sickest people. Now, at the same time, we're waiting with a bated breath for the budget next week. And you've been flagging that you're going to provide free GP care for under 5s. And we all welcome that. But the question I have to ask myself, Minister, is who's paying for this? Is it the 6-year-old? Is it the man with lung cancer? Is it the 3-year-old whose physical and intellectual disabilities is paying for the grand scheme of free GP care for everybody under 5? Because I have a sneaking suspicious feeling that that is the case. Now, he came into this Dáil elected with a mandate for universal health insurance and free GP care for everybody. For everybody. And as it stands, we haven't free GP care for anybody, but what we have is a situation where the sickest in our society, the people who most need the health services, are the ones that are suffering most. Now, you say that medical care should be provided not based on your ability to pay, but based on your need. These are the people who need it most. These are the people who need it most. Another man, over 70, at terminal stage, peg-fed, no longer able to move and speak, confined to a specialist wheelchair, dementia, awarded a GP-only card. Minister, you cannot, in conscience, stand up here and say there has been no change in policy. There has been a fundamental shift in policy. And the shift is very simple. What you are now doing is withdrawing discretionary medical cards on a continual basis. And you are right, there has been no change in guidelines, because there has never been guidelines for the discretionary medical card. That's the reason. It is a discretionary card. It is at the discretion of the people awarding the card to look at the circumstances, look at the needs of the individual, and either grant or not grant. Now, if there's no change in policy, how come people who have physical, intellectual disabilities and other medical needs, their needs haven't changed? Their illness profile hasn't changed, and now they can't get a medical card on the discretionary basis which they were previously granted. Of course there has to be a change of policy in terms of this particular issue. So, Minister, we are calling on you, and we're calling on this government, to do whatever it takes in terms of reversing this sinister, nasty attack on the sickest and the most vulnerable people in our communities right across the country. The very fact of the matter is that we actually had to table this motion is an indication that on a continual basis, deputies from all sides of the House are raising this issue. And if you don't believe me, just look at the Dáil questions day in, day out. Discretionary medical cards being withdrawn and asking the Minister to intervene. Now, I have raised this particular issue as far back as last January on Leaders' Questions, and the Taoiseach at the time said, well, send me on the individual cases. Now, I don't expect the Taoiseach, because he says he's a very busy man, I don't expect the Taoiseach to be, involved in every individual case. But the reason I sent them on is because it is just unbelievable that you can stand on that side of the House and defend this particular issue. I have a woman I raised in the Dáil. She's had a double mastectomy. She's had chemotherapy. and her medical card was taken from her. Eventually they said, well, we'll give her a GP card. Like, Minister, in all conscience, you have to accept the veracity of this particular motion. And your counter-motion is an insult to the thousands of people out there who are presently waiting for reviews, trying to assess or receive a discretionary medical card, and trying to put forward their medical evidence, their financial evidence, and waiting for months on end for decisions. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the cases are decisions to take medical cards that are granted on a discretionary basis as opposed to granting them.
Thank you, Deputy. First of all, I want to thank my colleague, Deputy Billy Kelleher, for listing this very important issue for debate here today. And the issue of discretionary medical cards is an issue that's affecting many thousands of families throughout the country. There's a real change in practice. The Minister might stand here and say there's no change in policy, but the actual practice has been changed of what's happening on the ground. I believe there is a change in policy. Probably not written down, but it is, and it boils back to the fundamental issue, is that this government is focused on cutting expenditure on the most vulnerable people in Irish society. They have decided as a matter of policy, the majority party in this government, that they will not ask those people who can make a larger contribution to running the country to so do, and they have said that those people who are relying on state services, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's people looking for medical cards, whether it's people on social welfare payments or parents depending on child benefit, they say we'll make the cuts at that level. And the Labour Party are implementing that right along the line, and Minister of State here is in the firing line for this, which is basically as a result of government policy to cut government expenditure on those who need it most, to protect the well-off people that are the main voters of your larger coalition partner in government. And that is why we are here, is why we have most of the difficulties on these areas. And if you look back at most of the motions over the last year or two, most of them have got to do with cuts in expenditure that this government, as a matter of choice, has decided to do rather than increasing taxation. You can no longer blame the Troika. They'll be gone and long gone. They will be your choices. The level of adjustment will be your choice, and more especially the breakdown of that adjustment in the budget this day and next week will be your choice between taxation and cuts in expenditure. And I know if you follow the practice of the last 2 years, we will have further aggressive steps in that regard. I've been struck with the number of claims and issues coming to my constituency office on this, and every TD can list individual difficult cases. I am going to highlight one in particular. But the one phrase that shocked me here in this chamber over the past this calendar year was when the Taoiseach was asked, I think by my party leader Micheál Martin, about this issue some time ago on Leader's question about the reduction in discretionary medical cards. And there was a time if a person had serious cancer, they got a medical card as a matter of course for a year or 2 years until they recover, as a matter of course. It may have never been written down as a policy, but that was the established practice in every part of Ireland. That practice has now changed. If you have serious cancer, you'll be told to go into your public hospital or whatever, and you do not get a medical card as a matter of course, and the discretionary medical cards have been withdrawn in those situations. And the Taoiseach was pursued on this matter. And the frightening comment he made was that people will get discretionary medical cards in those situations where the condition is life-limiting. Where the condition is life-limiting. In other words, if the condition you have is going to make you die sooner rather than later, you will get a medical card. If it's going to make you very sick and in a very distressed condition for the rest of your life, but may not shorten your life, the condition you have, you will not get a medical card. And the Taoiseach was specific in referring to cases where the condition was life-limiting. So I now say to myself, and they are the Taoiseach's word in this chamber from where you're sitting, that he said some time ago. And essentially, I've said to people, if you are now looking for, if you have cancer and you do get a medical card, some consultant must think you're on the way out, because the Taoiseach made it very clear you will only get it if your condition is life-limiting. And I find that is what is behind what's going on. And don't take my word for it. Look at what the Taoiseach has said. And it's fine for you to say there's no policy on this, there's no policy on that. I'm saying the practice that's being operated as a result of government decisions is in that category. I do want to highlight, I've dozens and dozens of cases, but I do want to highlight one particular case and that has come to public notice in County Laois recently, and I have the permission of the person involved to use his name in this debate here. And the article has been published in the Laois National, the local newspaper, on the 1st of October 2013. And his view on the difficulty this particular journalist with this paper, Joe Barrett, has experienced in relation to his medical card situation. On the public record, sure, your department, who scanned the papers for the nice photographs of the ministers when they're around the different constituencies, should have come across this article, and the heading is, "You couldn't make it up." That's how bad he thinks the story is. So, to summarise his story, which is one of several stories that I could relate here, and I'm putting this in with his permission, and it is in the public arena. He says, after 30 years of receiving a medical card, this year he was refused one. And he said there have been a lot of disquiet since Fine Gael Labour came into government and has cut 24,000 discretionary medical cards. I'm summarising this article. He said people did qualify before, but now they will only get so if they require urgent and ongoing medical treatment. And the first he heard of it was when he got a GP card. So he spoke to the HSE to know, why am I getting a GP card? I have serious conditions. And this is a man that your department and the HSE, and you cannot outsource this problem to the HSE, because Mr. Riley has abolished the old board of the HSE, and he's taking direct political control of this area. So at that stage, he decided necessary to tell the HSE his situation. Briefly, he said 30 years ago he underwent a kidney operation. Not long after that, he was found to have diabetes. After that, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure, and then he qualified for a medical card. Fast forward a number of years, he then suffered a heart attack. 2 months later, he had stents inserted in his arteries into his heart. A month later, he had an artery that had already been stented having to be redone. Then the same year, he went open-hearted surgery and received a triple bypass. Following that operation, he underwent a heart operation a year later when one of the grafts which was used in the bypass blocked and had to be restented. Over the years, he'd been in and out of the hospital, both Portlaoise and St Vincent's in Dublin on several occasions. And this is a person that you've refused a medical card to. And then his continuation, he goes on that he, in consultation with the cardiac surgeon, he chose not to undergo another cardiac procedure, and could you blame him? And during those years, he's undergone 6 angioplasty procedures, in addition to all of that, and over the years he's had various doses of different medication. He's currently on a daily dose of 14 tablets, and on top of that he's also currently in heart failure, and you have refused him a medical card. Shame on the Minister for Health, and shame on the Department of Health, who will say they don't have a policy to review, but your practice in operation actually does that. So then he went on to appeal the situation, and he was told, he said he wanted to know what medical assessor refused him his information. He asked for a copy of the file of the medical assessor, who came to the conclusion he was refused it. He was told he could apply for freedom of information to get his own medical information. Freedom of information, you told him to go through. Talk about trying to deal with a member of the public properly. And then at the end of all that, he has that appeal in, and in the meantime he's seeking a review from the HSC as why they refused him, and in light of that he can then be told that he can ultimately appeal again. All in the meantime, he doesn't have a medical card in relation to those conditions. There are several other conditions in that household as well that would back up the need for a discretionary medical card. That's on the public record, and that's one example. And you might say, well, the man isn't going to die, so he doesn't require a discretionary medical card.
Over a minute remaining.
About a minute remaining. So what I have to say to Minister White opposite, a good personal regard for the Minister. I actually believe he's sincere in that. He's gone into a department where he wants to make progress. But, Minister, you have to get on top of the situation where your department is, by your daily practice, is cutting back on people who have had these medical situations. I highlight the cancer cases in particular because years ago people got them as a matter of course for the year or two that they required them, and it did help them see them over. These people are worried with the cost. I've said his daily medication. You know, you've trebled the prescription fee, I think, from 50 cents per item to €1.50 per item on his prescription. That's now costing many households in the month up to €10 a month additional money. But in addition to that, they have to find the cash where they have difficulty so doing. So, Minister, I am asking you whether you'll accept it as a policy or a practice. It is actually happening on your daily watch, and you are responsible, and people are suffering, and they're feeling feeling that there is a deliberate policy, like you have in the Department of Social Protection, to remove people out of the system who are on disability and invalidity payments. The same policy now is carrying through into the medical card section to cut people off the medical cards and to reduce the actual cover. And I just have to say, he concludes his article by saying that he is now at 3 a.m. in the morning writing his appeal, and he does not know where he's going to next. He's worried sick with the stress that he cannot cope with, which is adding to his cardiac condition. In his worried state, he's also starting to affect his family life. And your answer, Minister, is you're not entitled to a medical card. Shame on the department.
Thank you, Deputy Fleming. Now call Deputy John Browne. 10 minutes.
Thank you, Lascombe Corla, and I'd like to compliment Deputy Billy Kelleher on putting forward this motion tonight, because the widespread and deliberate withdrawal of discretionary medical cards is causing huge anxiety and concern throughout the country. The number of discretionary medical cards fell from 80,000 at the start of 2011 to 63,000 at 2012, and as Deputy Kelleher has pointed out, the first 7 months of this year there's been a further reduction of medical cards, averaging about 1,100 to 1,200 per month. There is no doubt that there is a cynical campaign to reduce the number of discretionary medical cards. It is clear from what we are hearing in our clinics and indeed public representatives across the country that a wide-scale cull of discretionary medical cards is underway. We've had many examples of this, and indeed I find, and I'm sure it's the same with every other deputy, I never had as many representations about medical cards as I had this year for the first 6 months. Many people are losing their medical cards. There's a withdrawal of medical cards. There's a delay in issuing of medical cards, and people are very concerned and very annoyed about this. The government continues to mislead the public and deny that any such cuts are taking place. Indeed, I've heard the Taoiseach here on many mornings saying there's no change in the ground rules, there's no change in the regulations, there's no everyone should get a medical card that is entitled to it. But obviously the Taoiseach is out of touch with what's really happening by the HSE and what's happening on the ground. When the discretionary medical cards are issued, it is done so on health grounds. It is based on medical need. We have a situation under this government where thousands of cards have been withdrawn on the grounds that the recipients are above the income threshold. But the whole basis of discretionary medical card is that patients are assessed on the seriousness of their illness and not on their income. The Taoiseach and the Minister for Health continuously claim that there's been no change in policy, as I said, no change in medical card guidelines, but nothing could be further from the truth on the ground. Every public representative has seen evidence of this. There's a wide-scale programme of cuts hitting very sick children and vulnerable families which are under enormous pressures. We've been, as I said, we've been inundated with people whose medical cards have been revoked, where there is a clear and undeniable medical need, and this is what's very concerning at the present time. Families that are under severe pressure health-wise and medically are finding themselves now having to deal with the fact that their medical card has been withdrawn as well. The number of the discretionary medical cards, as I said, is down by over 20,000 since 2010. It would seem to give the impression that all of a sudden every person that had a medical card has been cured. They no longer need a medical card, and I think that shows the cynicism of this government at the present time. You can look at all of the, and if the Minister doesn't want to believe what we're saying on this side of the House, Emily O'Reilly recently stated that cutbacks were being implemented by applying the letter of the law and removing the element of discretion that previously applied. We had this, the Motor Neuron Association claimed that discretionary and emergency cards are not being given to members with the condition which is terminal. So There we have two independent groups stating the very same. And then we have the Jack and Jill Foundation, who do tremendous work for children and provides direct funding to families of the children with brain damage, enabling them to purchase home respite care being destroyed. As a result, it was impossible. They say it's impossible to get medical cards for children at the present time. So you have three, as I said, three independent groups stating that the discretionary medical card has been withdrawn, has been removed, and certainly it is at variance with what the Taoiseach and the Minister for Health are saying at the present time. Now, Deputy Fleming referred to cancer patients, and this is an issue that is causing grave concern, because I have always seen down the years, no matter what government was in power, no matter what Minister for Health was there, medical cards were issued to cancer patients for the period that they had the cancer until such time as it cleared up. But now we have a situation where cancer patients are no longer being allocated medical cards on medical grounds. They're being put through all kinds of situations in relation to their income and their finance. And the HSE have been saying that they issue them within 24 hours. Well, I can refute that by an example of a person that applied, where the family applied 3 weeks ago for a medical card, and the consultant from the particular hospital said, I've seen the letter, it's an end-of-life situation. And it's 3 weeks on, and that person has not been issued with the medical card. I have been on daily to the medical card section, to the TD inquiry section, and in fairness to the person there, he's been very helpful, very supportive in trying to find out why this medical card hasn't been issued. They have sought insurance policies, they have sought income grounds, they have sought farm premium payments, they've sought all kinds of information from the family, and at the same time the consultant says that the person is in an end-of-life situation. So obviously we now have a situation where medical cards are not being issued in situations like that. And the other area that medical card reviews is causing consternation with older people. I've had people coming into my clinic where they have had medical cards issued to them from 2014, 2015, 2016, old age pensioners, and now they're getting letters from the medical card section saying that we're carrying out a review. Why this is happening, we can get no explanation from the HSE or from the medical card people that issue them. They just say that they're told to look for a review, seek a review, and despite the fact that the people expected to have the medical card till 2014 or 2015 or 2016, I would ask the Minister to find out why this is happening to old age pensioners. They have no change in their circumstances. They have no increase in their pension, as the Minister Joan Burton keeps continuously saying. She has not reduced her pension, which is fair enough, but she hasn't increased her pension either to enable them to be outside the medical card limit. So I think these are areas that the Minister has to look seriously at, that the discretionary medical card system must be reintroduced, that the review of medical cards for old age pensioners that have no change in circumstances, these people should be left alone and not put pressure on them, as old age pensioners shouldn't be put into that situation of going off again to try and send up their pension book numbers, all of that kind of situation when there's been no changes. So, Minister, we are spelling out very clearly tonight that we have major problems with the issuing of discretionary medical cards. We're saying it. As I said, the Motor Neuron Association are saying it, Jack and Jill are saying it, and Emily O'Reilly, who is the most independent person in this country, she has been continuously saying it, that the HSE are withdrawing medical cards from discretionary medical cards from patients that are seriously ill, suffering from cancer, suffering from stroke, suffering from heart problems, and are not and being put under severe pressure. They have enough of pressure, enough of family situations without having to suffer then the pressures of trying to reapply or not being allowed a medical card. So I'd ask the Minister to look seriously at the situation and to have all of the issues that we have raised here tonight clarifies and changed to ensure that discretionary medical cards that people are entitled to will be reissued as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Deputy Dáil. Deputy Barry Cowen. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Count Corda. This motion, talks about the fact that the numbers of discretionary medical cards fell from 80,524 at the start of 2011 to 63,000 at the end of 2012. And in the first 7 months of this year, we've had a further reduction of 8,100, which is a monthly average reduction of 1,163. And this is against a background of obvious increases in eligibility, increases in suitability on the part of many in society by virtue of the situation we find ourselves in. And it has gone to such a pitch that this is not the first time that these issues have been brought to bear here in the Chamber, with the view to having these issues resolved, with the view to having these issues addressed in a manner which we feel would be more in line with what we find in our constituency offices throughout the country. And to such an extent that when I consult with my own office and I consult with my clinics on a regular basis and meet with this growing number of people who have been reviewed and lost medical cards following reviews, it lends me to have to contact a sample of those today and ask their permission to use their case tonight here in the Chamber. And I've been given that permission. But I don't wish, and I wouldn't use anybody's name, but I will make the cases available to the Minister after. And I'm going to use my time to give you an example of some of the cases. Helen has had a full medical card for a number of years as she suffers from severe rheumatoid arthritis and attends Vincent hospitals on a regular basis. Her application came for renewal in April 2013 and was refused. We requested a review and that was disallowed. We then requested an appeal and only got word yesterday that she was granted a doctor's only medical card. This lady is on medication which costs her over 100 a week and she does not have the means to meet. Timothy has always had a full medical card on medical grounds as he suffers from ADHD, drug addiction, depression and a fracture to a vertebrae. As he has held the card, it also entitles 3 children to a card. Came up for renewal in August, was refused, currently under review. Anne has always had a full medical card on medical grounds as she suffers from osteopenia and severe rheumatoid arthritis. Her case came up for review in April 2013. Application refused, went to review, refused again, and also refused on appeal. Rita has had a full medical card as she had a number of medical conditions and is currently awaiting surgery on her kidneys and her bowel. Her card came up for renewal in August and was awarded only a doctor visit card. Requested a review of this case and await the outcome. Audrey has always had a full medical card. She suffers from hypertension and is long-term medication, attends her GP on a regular basis. Her application came for review in April 2013, was refused. We requested a review of the decision. The original decision was upheld. Her case is currently under appeal. Kieran has always held a full medical card on medical grounds as Kieran suffers from COPD, sleep apnea, heart disease and high blood pressure. Came up for review in February 13, was refused. We requested a review which is ongoing. Jack is age 9. He's held a full medical card. He has multiple disabilities. Physical disability is that of cerebral palsy and a hearing impairment. Jack's medical card came up for review in February and he was awarded a doctor visit card. They requested a review and the original decision was upheld. We therefore appealed the decision and that again was upheld. And the final case during the short time that I have in this sample relates to a young lady I've known, and I'll just give you, I'll quote a letter I wrote to the Minister and to the Department in early August, on the 1st of August. I write further to representations in relation to the above named, we'll just say her name is Jeanette, and further to a phone conversation this morning with somebody in your section. I've known Jeanette and her family all my life. She's from my hometown. She's born without her lower limbs and has been in a wheelchair all her life. This is not her, never did deter her, and she lived a very fulfilling life and has continued to do so and excelled in sport in all aspects of community life. She works in the HSC, has always sought not to be an economic burden on the state, and she has, unfortunately, her own medical needs which she retains, which surpass her means. And now that she has dependents, namely her partner whom is unemployed, and a miracle baby now 12 months old. That baby, unfortunately, is in constant need of specialist medical attention, and all the relevant details pertaining to that case, economic and medical, are on the file. I said I find it distressing that this application process has been so poorly dealt with, considering the amount of communication that she had with the relevant sections dealing with her application. She was informed, for example, over the phone that the cards were granted, only to be informed the opposite days later. It's unbelievable that she should be forced to avail of my office in seeking the only decision possible to be arrived at in her case. I said then that I don't normally seek to personalise cases in such a manner, but I'm too well aware of the need in this case and this instance, and could not for the life of me understand how the case had been dragged on so long in the first instance, and how a medical assessor could not find her favour in relation to her application. I asked for arrangements to be made for her cards to be issued, or failing that, to make available to me the full reasoning and methodology at a decision that the medical cards were not necessary for a medical perspective. Unfortunately, I didn't receive any explanation from the office in question in relation to that decision and how it was arrived at. But unfortunately, the lady in question did not retain her medical card, and is just in receipt of a doctor's only visit card, and does not have the means to meet the demands on both her and her child. It does not, and is in great medical need for those, apart from the financial means at all. As I said, it's just a sample of what is prevalent in all our offices, and it is a sample that has grown on a greater scale as the months pass. And it is plain to see, for me, it is plain to see from my colleagues that these issues are not being dealt in the manner in which we can stand over. And I ask you to take a personal interest in the cases that we will forward to you, in order to see where is it there are failings within the relevant section in relation to this issue, or is it that? And I doubt it very much that it is the case.
Your 5 minutes.
It couldn't be that a direction is being given, but it seems patently obvious that it might be the case.
Okay. Deputy Collins.
Thanks, Lascon Corla. If I may at the outset, I just want to make a few comments in relation to the junior doctors' dispute today. I think it's very regrettable, and you know, we have to consider the plight of junior doctors. Equally, we have to consider the people whose procedures and operations were indeed cancelled today. And I think it's incumbent on everybody to get together to try and resolve this. I think we'd all be agreed on that for the betterment of everybody. And I think it is fair to say that junior doctors over the years have been failed by the state. They've been failed also by the IMO, their trade union. I think the old guard of the IMO, and I know that the IMO have changed recently, there's been a change in the leadership there, and I think that is refreshing and it is welcome. And I think it's about time that they got proper representation and proper leadership from their trade union. Minister, I think the debate tonight crystallises a number of points which I just want to address briefly. Why are people cynical about politics and about politicians and about us and the profession that we are engaged in? It is because there is a complete disconnect between what happens people on the ground and what they hear from officials speak. And that is regrettable. And the fact of the matter is this. You will say, and your minister will say, and your department will say that there has been no change in policy. But there has been a de facto change in policy. And there's no getting out from under that. And that is what we are experiencing every day of the week. That is what people who are experiencing on the ground when they get notification that they have been unilaterally cut off their medical card, that their medical card has been withdrawn. And a lot of these people, the first time that they ever hear of this or become aware of this is when they're actually in their doctor's clinic or their doctor's surgery. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. There may be fault on all sides, but I don't think that that is good enough. It's not good enough for the patient, for the card holder. It's not good enough for the doctors either. And when people are sick and in a stressful scenario, the last thing they need to be doing, apart from trying to get themselves better, is worrying about the status of their medical card. And, you know, to say that that isn't something which you're responsible for, or the department isn't responsible for, isn't good enough. and it needs to be addressed. Now, my main concern, and I'm going to raise a specific case here in the 60 seconds that I have left, is in relation to the discretionary medical card for cancer patients. And I will give you the details of the case when we're finished, and I have the permission of this lady, Anne, to raise her case. She rang me from her hospital bed on a number of occasions. She was diagnosed with breast cancer last February. She had a chemotherapy treatment. She had a mastectomy. She's now having radiation in Limerick and bone treatment in Cork, and she's due a second round of chemo in Cork in due course. And, you know, I think it's regrettable and reprehensible that I have to raise her case here in the chamber of Dáil, albeit with her permission, to try and further along her case. And I have been dealing with the PCRS people, and she is at the end of her tether. You know, it's about a medical report, and her GP has furnished a detailed medical report. She's literally at the end of her wits' end, and her GP is saying to her, I have furnished the PCRS your medical status. This woman has cancer. And, you know, apart from this case, which I'll give you the details, all the other cases of people right around the country who've had their cards unilaterally withdrawn. When people are sick, they can't work, they can't earn money. Some of them might have insurance cover or illness cover, but others don't. And medical cards entitle them to other benefits, for example, school transport for their kids, or all the other knock-on benefits. So it's putting pressure on people. So what I want to say to you is this. You have responsibility for medical cards. There has, in effect, been a de facto change in policy, and I think we just need to be honest with ourselves and get away from the official spin which has been put out about this, that there hasn't been, because the figures prove it, and the evidence is on the ground and it's there in our clinics, and I really think that you need to meet the challenge head on. Thank you.